Chapter 1 The Meeting of Mr. World and Miss Church Member. Number 1. The dying of a century compared to the waning of a day. Number 2. The allegory opens with a panoramic view of human life as seen through the open door of the 20th century on the Broad Highway and King's Highway. Blakana is introduced. 3. Mr. World meets Miss Church Member at a place called Fellowship. From here she journeys with him on the Broad Highway, where she witnesses several sad endings of human life. In the closing hours of a long day, I climbed a rugged path to a high eminence whence I overlooked a beautiful valley and watched, with increasing delight, the changing hues of earth and sky. As the shadows of twilight were deepening, each moment grew more strange and mysterious, until the waning day seemed to be transformed into the dying of the century. Then I saw, as through a glass darkly, the whole panorama of human life, with its painful pictures of sadness and sin, and its blessed scenes of peace and righteousness. I also heard the unmistakable wails of a suffering humanity and the turmoils of myriad contentions, all strangely mingling with the songs of glory and the shouts of spiritual triumph. In deep silence, I continued looking upon these endless confusions of the church and the world as they still played their perplexing parts in the fitful drama before me. All of this so preyed upon my mind that I involuntarily cried out in the anguish of my soul, "When will confusion come to an end and sweet peace cover the earth as the waters cover the sea?" "Will you wait for the winds to answer, or shall I?" replied a voice, so passing strange that I was startled. I turned to see in whose presence I was, and to my horror I beheld a dark creature unlike any mortal being. He was out without definite form, and not cumbered with any garments. His indescribable face was set with two bright eyes, softened in expression until a slight halo revealed to me a countenance half beautiful and half terrible. "Who are you, and what is your mission?" I finally ventured to ask after speech had found my lips, for I was altogether ignorant of his nature or purpose. "I am Blakana, from the lower world of spirits, and am commanded here to stay until released." "Until released? What power binds you here, and how long will you abide?" I asked in dread suspense. "I must remain as your companion and interpreter until the vision is past." I trembled under these announcements, but I was assured that underneath me were the everlasting arms, and moreover I heard a still small voice whispering within me, "Stand still, O mortal man. Neither Blakana nor any of his horde shall do thee harm. He hovers before thee at my bidding, and will leave thee only at my command. Ask him what thou wilt, and he must answer thee, even to the limit of his knowledge." At this juncture, and without a moment's warning, my vision was enlarged, and an unusual light flashed upon me. Quickly I cast my wondering eyes all about me, and saw that I was standing at the very threshold of a great door. It was of some imposing dimensions, and so magnificently constructed that only the architects of heaven could have designed it. Instinctively I turned to Blakana, who could now face without fear. "Where are we, and what is the meaning of this great door?" And as I spoke, unseen hands swung it open upon its hinges. "We are standing at the open door of the 20th century. You may look out into the coming years as far as you wish," replied Blakana in a cold, indifferent manner. Thrilled by such an unusual sight, and the thought which his interpretation and words suggested, I marveled at his sullenness, for Blakana did not so much as lift his head to see the spectacle. "Oh, Blakana," I cried, "why are you so dead to the surroundings?" "These are mere playthings," was his gruff reply. "To me, the doors of the centuries, which open and shut on the cycles of time, are as trifles, neither lessening my misery nor adding to my pleasure." During a brief thoughtful silence, I continued looking at him as a shudder swept my whole being. I then turned from this creature so shrouded in mystery, and stepping forward to look through the open door, I was suddenly overawed at the still greater scenes which spread in wondrous panorama before my entranced vision. Upon the new light I beheld a marvelous sight, for I could distinctly see the myriad millions of humanity moving on the paths of life toward a common goal. In the bright halo of the scene I saw the beautiful King's Highway, on which were marching the hosts of the heaven militant, led triumphantly by the Spirit of God to the very gates of the celestial city, which, though distant, I could yet see under the dazzling light radiating from the central throne of glory as from untold suns. In the darker shadows of this same panorama, I saw the broad highway with its thronging multitudes, some with deliberate step, scrutinizing the objects along the way, others in mad haste, rushing on toward an awful destruction whose wreck and ruin loomed up dimly in the glare of an eternal burning. Among the happy pilgrims of the King's Highway was one named Miss Church Member, who had left the broad way of death, and entered, through Christ, into that marvelous light wherein she was now walking. Her tread was in sweet harmony with the footsteps of her Master, and her beautiful face was all aglow with the passion of pure love. A pilgrim's robe added beauty to her form. A Bible, carried upon under her arm, gave some evidence of her spiritual character, and a religious emblem, worn over her heart, told that she was a member of some Christian organization. Miss Church Member, in traveling her chosen path, tarried at a place called Fellowship, which occupied a pleasing site close by the King's Highway. Here one could readily speak and associate with the travelers who moved in gay companies along the broad highway. At this visiting place she met a certain Mr. World, a good jolly fellow, of corpulent build, who was attired in the fashion of the day, and bore himself with more than usual jauntiness in the presence of Miss Church Member. After a pleasing conversation in which Mr. World plied his satanic shrewdness and sophistry, he was emboldened to give his brief invitation. "Will you journey a short distance with me on the broader highway, that I may prepare myself with more facility to accompany you where you wish, even on a path as narrow as the one you seem to love?" "Ah, Mr. World," she said with a tolerant smile, "do you not know that you are walking on the way of danger and death? Why would you have me share your folly? It were 1,000 times better for you to join me at once on a path that leads to everlasting happiness. Here you can drink the water of life in abundance, and feed upon angels' food. Oh, come, Mr. World," she added as she spoke more earnestly, "linger no longer. Carry out the resolution which you have already broken repeatedly, and you will never regret so wise an action." Thus did Miss Church Member urge upon him a course, which in her inimitable missionary spirit she made really attractive to him. Although he appreciated her genuine earnestness, yet he could not be induced to heed her words. "You have covered the whole field of my intention," he courteously replied. "I sincerely wish to mend my ways, but there are certain things I must first overcome. How much better I could do this if one like you, in whom I have supreme confidence, would but journey at my side. Will you not do the work of a good missionary, and like Christ adapt yourself to my level, that I may, by your uplifting influence, be drawn into a nobler life, and even have your companionship as I go up to the highway of your King?" Miss Church Member, being of a sympathetic nature, and of strong missionary proclivities, refused to heed her many counselors who feared for her safety, and actually stepped still further from her wonted path, and journeyed at the side of Mr. World with the desire to compass his conversion. But her conscience at first troubled her, and her feet moved with a suspicious tread. In this nervous, half-confiding, and half-shrinking mood, she leaned lightly upon his arm, ever turning a deaf ear to the entreaties of her well-meaning friends, who still hoped to dissuade her from this ill-advised course. Mr. World was keenly delighted at her concession and loyalty to him. He seemed to be willing to go to any sacrifice that might add to her comfort or increase her happiness. His many companions could readily see that Miss Church Member felt out of place, but she justified her own course by what she was aiming to do. He saw that her dress of righteousness was in wide contrast with the filthy rags that covered his own soul, and so he preferred to look upon the garments that adorned his outer person, and the gaudy scenes of either side of the way. I beheld this wide path along a great length, and I shuddered as I saw the masses thereon, who were engaged in the frivolities of life, as found in the swiftly passing pleasures of sense and sight. The thoughtless throngs were seemingly unconscious that underneath the whole length and breadth of the path there were strata of fire, and they were apparently blind to the sulphurous flames which here and there issued from openings into which many an unsuspecting traveler fell. Sad to relate, of all the moving multitudes there were but few, indeed, who took warning and fled toward the king's highway. Many, like Miss Churchmember, were walking on the forbidden path for no other reason than some weak apology. "What mean these lurid openings?" nervously asked Miss Churchmember, for their flames excited her terror. Mr. World replied with a look of surprise. "Have you never heard that these are to give light to pilgrims such as we? Without them the way would prove very dark and dreary." "What a contrast," she exclaimed, "between these lights and those that illumine the king's highway! They shine from above with increasing splendor, while these cast forth from below their uncertain lights. It seems to me that the farther we go, the darker becomes the way, and its lights the more inconstant. So fitful is their gruesome glare." "Ah, I see what ails you," responded Mr. World. "Your eyes are at fault. We will presently meet the expert who will correct your vision, ere your eyes are totally ruined." The attention of Miss Churchmember was suddenly attracted by seeing a man who was just sinking out of sight into the fire of destruction. As soon as he disappeared, the flames burst forth in fury through the newly made opening. Instantly, a servant of Satan covered the breach so that observers could no longer hear the wails of the poor man, nor smell the fumes from the burning strata. Then did I look, and behold, I saw such places in countless variety, each attended by a servant of the Black Prince. Each opening, made by an unfortunate victim, was promptly sealed so that others, in passing along, would the more readily be ensnared in one of these fatal fissures. Miss Churchmember was more than alarmed at these sad endings of human life, which now came to her attention more vividly than when she traveled on the king's highway. She also saw, not far ahead of her, a woman sinking in utter despair, and ran to rescue her. But the unfortunate victim fell to her wretched ruin before the hands of Miss Churchmember could give assistance. "Help! Help! I sink, I know not whither," was her wailing cry, as she was passing out of sight, her arms outstretched beseechingly toward her would-be rescuer, who arrived in time to see the first greedy flames that issued from the fresh opening. "Oh, horror!" shrieked Miss Churchmember as she turned toward Mr. World. "That ought to be enough to keep anyone from such a snare of wickedness and vice." Without a moment's delay, a demon rushed to the fiery opening and covered it from sight, completing his work so quickly and with such skill that neither the opening nor the glare of the flames were any longer perceptible. But Miss Churchmember refused to leave the spot, and with tears she urged Mr. World to place there a sign of warning, so that other short-sighted mortals who came that way might read and heed. "It would be only a waste of time and energy. I have seen hundreds of such places where travelers have gone down, even under the sign of the cross." "Indeed, Mr. World, I feel as though I should stand here continually and speak words of personal warning to anyone who might seem determined to walk in such a terrible path as this." Her finger pointed to the spot where she had just seen the poor victim fall to rise no more. "Look yonder," he hurriedly spoke as he touched her arm. "Do you see that woman with her steps in the same direction? Now try your skill," he added with more sneer than sympathy in his voice. She did not tarry to resent his attitude, but quickly went to the woman and asked her to pause a moment. "Are you willing to be saved from destruction?" earnestly asked Miss Churchmember. "I am safe enough," was the indifferent reply. "You are now walking rapidly toward an awful death," were her further words of warning. "What right have you to judge me?" she curtly replied, "since you also are on this broad highway? Have I not heard already the words of warning from those who also wear the pilgrim's robe, but who journeyed on the king's highway? Their words brought conviction to my heart and tears to my eyes, but your words only stir up my indignation. Why speak so unkindly to a friend? My only intention is to do you good. I just saw one who came to a horrible end by continuing a little further in the same course that you are now pursuing." Then did the wicked woman fly into her rage. "You need no more concern yourself about me. I have 2 eyes, as many as you have. Look to your own future, not mine, at your steps, and not at another's." "Come," impatiently spoke Mr. World as he drew her by the arm. "It is just as I expected. Let us get away from this sickly atmosphere." But Miss Churchmember lingered only to see the heedless woman step to the last extreme and sink hopelessly, with her piteous cries for help came too late for any to rescue her.